In order to start a debate, really, I want to disagree with what had been said, namely with the statement that we have a definition, that we know what the middle class is. Working in law now, and this means I want to take a very different perspective, I refer to a sentence frequently used, although I change it. It is ubo societas ibi interesse est. Usually this refers to where there is society, there is law. And I say where there is society, there is interest. And this means to start the definition of the middle class from two angles that are usually not considered. The one is, if we talk about the middle, we obviously have to say where are the ends. The middle always refers to some end in terms of to some extremes, and then it can be cut off, can be defined as the middle. Now this can be between two poles, horizontally or vertically, one point of discussion and of definition. But we have to refer to these extremes. The other point is, I do not want to see middle class as a statistical issue, but I want to refer it to society and to say, at least this is one interpretation, the origin of the middle class or the middle classes is being interested, being stuck in between the classes and having a certain interest to work on a positioning of themselves, and themselves meaning the class. As I said, there is not much research, much work done on the middle classes, at least on the theoretical level. The one is Thorsten Veblen, actually referring to the upper classes, but I think it is justified to say he is referring to the middle classes. And he says there are two dimensions of it that are going back actually in some anthropological perspectives. It is vaporing and showing muscles, very animalistic ways of behaving. And he says, Thorsten Veblen says, what it actually means is, in society now, in terms of classes, it means idleness on the one hand, and it means consumption on the other hand. In some respect, we can say this is the old concept, as we know it from antiquity, of work, of labor. Idleness, the ideal of not working, of not having to work, because work is or had been considered as something, let's say, dirty, something negative. You have to work. It is not a voluntary act. And then showing off consumption, that you really don't have to work, and nevertheless you have the opportunity, you have the means, and can not only survive but have a good life in terms of the material standard. The other theoretical perspective had been much later by, I think in the 1950s, by the German sociologist Helmut Schelsky, proposing that there is a process of leveling, and at the end of the day, we do not have a middle class because everybody is middle class, meaning not cutting something out between the extremes, but cutting the extremes off and saying everything is middle class, everything has a certain standard of life and has the same control over life and living conditions. Now, both are questionable in the light of a third position, namely that of Max Weber, who says the middle class, or who according to whom we can say the middle class is actually that group in society that finds a way of mediating. It is coming from a negative background, jugglers and quacks and people who are not knowledgeable in a certain way, but who are not acknowledged, not recognized, positively recognized in society. They developed in different ways as professions, as middle class, and managed to have a certain profile that they actually did not depend on money in terms of their income, but on a certain income as professions. So they didn't, in a way, they didn't work for money, at least not in a competitive way. It's doctors, it's lawyers, in some respect it's teachers who have the security of availing of a certain income and not working for the income, meaning their performance is not aimed on certain income. I get the same money independent of the performance. The performance is basically calculated on, let's say, a broken leg. You have to do your job, you have to do your job according to professional standards, and that's it. You would not do a better job if somebody pays more money for it. So in this way, the middle class, you can say, is that group in society that has a certain interest in society to improve society or to improve certain parts of society. Legal conditions, legal equality, securing the position of people, the health of society and, of course, of individuals, and the like. Now, with the time, these professions developed further, meaning they had been spreading beyond the original areas of teaching, legal security, medical services, or whatsoever. And they had been spreading out in administrative areas especially, and it had been a class or classes that gained a certain independence of performance. They had been especially, of course, state bodies, employed by state bodies, and emerged as a class that did not have interest in society anymore, but where interest changed simply into the direction of getting and maintaining a job. So there was a perpetuum, there was the idea of getting a job, maintaining a job is the main thing. So you see Peter Principle and others where these organizations grow due to the fact that people need jobs and have to secure their jobs. I don't want to go into detail here. David Graeber is speaking nowadays from bullshit jobs, jobs that are not really needed, that are only needed to be there. To be there for the person who has this job and does this job independent of doing it good or bad, independent of substance. There is no substance. And we can clearly see this now. It's a broad field, but we can clearly see it in the health sector. increasingly dominant, is the administration. The doctor still has to do the job, but what he or she does is hugely determined by the administration. If you go to teaching, university teaching, the best paid jobs are in the meantime in the administration. Not for teaching you get money, not for research you get money, but you get it for administering projects, administering money, and so on and so forth. In this way, there is a huge group developing as middle class that does not actually have a societal function in terms of maintaining what you may call good society. The main aim, sustain yourself. And of course, those jobs are easily to be replaced. There is no need for these jobs in technical terms as well, because in many cases you can just standardize what they do, get some algorithms, get some robots to do this. If you have care, for instance, there are certain things you can perform by robots. Certain things, I say, which means that the care job itself is already reduced. A recent example or recent debate on this topic is actually when it comes to artificial intelligence, where the Tesla boss wants to implement certain means that are directly linking the brain to computers. Now, so far so good, it sounds even attractive, but what actually happens in this context is reducing human intelligence, making human intelligence compatible with the computer, which basically means making it compatible with 0 and 1. There's, of course, a huge area that you can express with 0 and 1, but there is a huge area you cannot, and that is 2 to n. To some extent, you can adapt it, you can cheat a little bit, but the original 2 to n cannot be expressed on the basis of 0 and 1. And this is where I say, coming back to the beginning, we are dealing with interest, with the interesse, with being in between, being part of a society that allows you being part. So the definition I propose, not denying the importance of material concerns and income and education, the important part is focus on a societal change, not even the extremes. Of course, there is the necessity of bridging it, but focus on a society that provides enough space for interest, for engagement, for change, providing space that is not limited to employment and skills-oriented education that leads to employment, but opening education to knowledge, reopening it to knowledge, and then to say this knowledge is not there for the drawer or just to have it, but it is knowledge that can be applied in a creative process. Let me conclude with 3 concrete points in analytical terms. The one is I moved only more or less recently to Berlin, which I knew before from touristy visits or visits to conferences, workshops. And being opera lover and theater lover, of course, I knew the main places, the State Opera, the Brecht Ensemble, Deutsche German Theater, and stuff. Great places. But now, living in an area actually which is traditionally a little bit run down, as people say, socially problematic, I came across the Neukölln Opera, a small place. If you want an alternative place, it's not really about opera, it's about artwork, and it is used to encourage students at an early stage to be engaged. I went once there, and I had been thrilled by the performance. It had been dealing exactly with those issues that are problematic in terms of an actual loss or decrease of the middle class, populism and the stuff. And it had been dealing in an excellent way with this problematic, with hostility against foreigners and all this. And actually, I talked to many people, and I look forward soon to visit the opera again. This time, not alone, because it is as well something where you don't go enjoying this piece, this performance, and go home. It is as well something where you engage with the people, and you want to with the piece, and you want to engage with somebody else to talk about it, to be able to work with your emotions. I think this is part of a space where middle class has a value, has a meaning. The other example, it's two examples in one. I read recently, and of course there is work to be done and more in detail. I read an empirical study, children being asked two questions. What is your dream job? What do you want to do? What kind of work do you want to do? This was the one question, and the other is, what do you want to make out of your life? What do you want to make with your life? The answer to the first question, I want to be administrator, I want to be CEO, I want to be shop assistant in a good position or whatsoever. Apparently there had been only a very small number of kids, and I'm talking about 7 to 10 years old, that had been keen to fly to the moon, explore the Mars, go for adventures or whatsoever. You can say, well, this is the old contradictions as we have them. The more conservative Gauss method of calculating everything, calculating the future, and the Humboldt method, if you want, to go out and do something to change, well, to explore and change. There was no Albert Schweitzer, the doctor, going into an area where it is dangerous, where it is an adventure to help people. The second question then, what do you want to make with your life? The answer, I want to make money. Of course you need money, there's no doubt. And of course you need money as well in order to avail of education, in order to avail of health service and. But if it is becoming the sole end of life, making money, without any further reflection, I think it is hugely problematic. And to conclude, I think it is not these kids, but it is we, as parents, as teachers, as grandparents, or as well as siblings perhaps, as peers, who push people, who push kids into this direction. And of course it is not us personally, but it is the conditions under which we live and the conditions still that we allow. I'm talking in another context about this issue of hegemony, of standard setting. And even if we cannot really change much, I think there is something where we all have to take more responsibility for shaping society, for offering a space where we may be able really to speak of a new capitalism, not of a sharing capitalism, sharing in the way of you do the work and I get the profit from it, but perhaps in terms of a distributive society. I think Brian Arthur came up with this idea, where actually what we produce and what we consume is hugely socialized and should be recognized, acknowledged as being a social product, social work and a social product to be consumed socially. In this way, actually, it may be that Veblen had been very wrong. There is no need to show muscles, and that the conservative, ultra-conservative Shelsky had been in a way right, correct, although not in the way he meant it, but in a way of having a space for elevating people who do not have access to society, to make them interested or to allow them being interested, and to cut off the power and the abuse of power of those as Mr. Trump or Mr. Zuckerberg or you name them. The extremes are the danger. And the structural danger is leaving it to the extremes, cutting off something in the middle, namely cutting off the space of or the space for engagement. I hope this is a little bit provocative or provocative enough to have a discussion on issues of the middle class. If we lose the middle class as we have it, I don't see a problem. If we lose the space for developing a middle class, that I would say is a problem. And that means as well, if we lose the ground, the foundation, the material foundation for such engagement. Thank you.